Hey, so I thought we'd talk a little bit tonight about something we've already talked several times about, but it's worth repeating a little bit and maybe emphasizing a little more detail. And that is, we're going to go back to the sluice box. Why, you say? Well, because the sluice box, like the gold pan, are two of the key elements, and I'll show you a little bit more about that, but they're two of the key tools that you're going to want to learn about early on because of the effect of gravity and the classification or self-classifying nature of a sluice box and how it behaves. And it's worth kind of looking at it from several different angles to understand why it works the way it does and how you can improve the output. So let me check to make sure we got our feeds going correctly. I see a little bit of funniness, and you can tell me if you're seeing any glitchiness on your end, but I see a little bit. I'm having some fun with my digitizer. It might be giving out. I hope not. It's given lots of trusty service over the years, but sooner or later these things burn out. So let's check to make sure. We got a dog barking down there. We'll leave him doing his thing. But right now, what I want to do is check, make sure you're all coming on board on the page, and that we have the new. I see more puzzling gold clues. There we go. 13 people live on Sluice Box. So back to the Sluice Box, like Back to the Future. I stole that. 4 comments. We got our audio. Let's roll. So tonight, back to the Sluice Box. Let's take a look at this for a second and think about it for a moment. I wanted to bring up, again, the Gold Prospectors collection is still available, but only until midnight tomorrow night. So get in there and get it if you're going to. Check it out. sourdoughminer.com/GPC. And in there is some discussion of sluice boxes and their setup and use, as well as pans and how to use them and set them up, as well as some rocks and minerals and etc. There's a bunch of good stuff to get you going. And so the thing I wanted to touch on here, let's see. Sluices find their location in several different places. You can find them in the use in a simple sluice like I showed on that front page, or in a dredge like shown here, or in a dredge trommel arrangement, which you might see on land instead of on water application. The fact of the matter is they're used all over the place, and they're not just used for gold prospecting. They're used for finding diamonds, all kinds of jewels, gems, etc. They're used to find other minerals other than gold, anything that has a high specific gravity relative to the local mineralization. So if there's a lot of quartz and sands and things like that, all it's got to be is heavier than 2, and this sluice can start separating it. So here's something I want you to take a look at in these cases. Both cases we have flowing water and we're running material through them. And in both cases that material is separating out naturally down the flow. What I was going to talk a little bit about in this particular case, I've talked previously about the arrangement of riffles and their angles and all that stuff. We'll let that go. You can check out that particular Sluice Box riffle design video here on Facebook or over on YouTube on my Prospector Jess channel on YouTube, or here on Facebook on the Hunting for Gold Facebook page. But for tonight, I'm going to focus mainly on one aspect of sluice operation. It's a really important one, and especially if you're finding lots of fine gold, and that is velocity or speed. And so there are a couple of things that can affect velocity or speed in the sluice box that are, some are under your control, some are not. Some are in the design of the box, and some are not. So what you want to do is look at some of them with respect to when you're looking to buy a sluice. You'll want to look at particular things about its design, and other things you want to know about how to use the sluice and how to set it up properly so that you can control the pieces that are in your control and know what to look for. So let's flip to the blackboard for a moment. So as we've talked about in the past, one of the things that can affect a sluice's operation is very simple, and that is the angle of a sluice and its operation. Let me flip this color a little bit here. So if I have water entering at some position up here and then it descends down the sluice, I'm exaggerating the socks off of this thing because it's not going to do that. It has to exit almost at the entry level. That's the thing about sluices, is they typically operate in an area where there really isn't a lot of elevation change. But the idea here is the same, and that is there's a descent. That descent leads to, and here's our sluice box channel. So as the water comes down this sluice box channel, what's going to happen is up here this water will enter at a certain speed, and down at the bottom it's going to exit at a much faster speed. The net result is the water is accelerating as it descends the chute, pretty much driven by gravity, along with all the material that's in that sluice. Now, what can you do to control that? Well, I've seen a lot of people talk about different angles and things like that. That's the right idea. And that is the angle of this sluice determines, big fancy, we'll put a theta here or something really fancy, make it look like we're doing this thing scientifically. But the idea is we have an angle that we set the sluice at, and that determines how fast that water races down that track. We want to make sure we set that angle at a decent rate. One simple way is just to measure the amount of time it takes for an object that floats on the surface to make it from point A to point B. You know, where A is at the top of the sluice and B is on the exit. And that is one of the simplest methods, without using any kind of special, you know, angle measuring tools, or, you know, any kind of a level, or any special laser levels or anything like that. You just measure how long it takes for something to come out. The rate at which you want it to fly out of there depends on what you're going after. And we've talked about that in the past. If I want to have stuff coming out, if I want to basically settle out a lot of material that it has really fine content, I'm going to need to slow it down. That means to reduce the angle. If I want it to come out with, you know, and it has lots of chunky gold coming out, and I have lots of rocks and things like that that I want to clear out as it's going through, and I want to move more material, and I speed up by increasing the angle. You can only go so far. You know, typical one of these things is only about 3 inches deep, so you can only go the difference of 3 inches and 3 feet. That's not much angle. So what you're going to want to do is kind of adjust that based on what you're seeing. We've talked about filling up each one of those riffles no more than halfway across as you're filling it up. The other thing you can do is adjust the rate at which you fill your sluice. You can adjust the rate of intake up here. So when you feed stuff in, slow it down. If you have lots of sandy, silty material and you want it to move slowly through, so you need to slow it down two ways. One, decrease the slope. Two, decrease the input. If you put too much junk in here and it's moving really slow, it's just going to form a great big sandbar and everything bounces downhill. So that's one aspect that affects the flow rate, is the angle. Simple way to adjust it. Now, let's clear this whiteboard again. Another way is the design of the sluice, and this will get into some of the more fancy-dancy things that are going on. As you can see in the sluice that I have on the front screen, we have a big opening, wide mouth, angled piece. It's funneling water in and sort of amplifying the effect of a slow creek flow into a channel. The fixed width of that channel is something like this. Now, if I wanted this sluice to have a slightly different behavior, I might have designed it to have a slightly different shape. That is, if I want it to continue to increase velocity as it goes downstream and have it really jetting material out, I might make the walls actually kind of go inward like this, where this bottom end is a really fast motion and the top end is really slow. That could come in handy for, you know, one particular use, and that would be if I had a lot of material that was really coarse, kind of gravelly stuff and tended to get trapped up at the top. Then I would want to continue to increase the acceleration as I'm going down the sluice. The other opposite effect would be if I took this thing and I widened it out. Let me change the colors a little bit here. So if I widened it out and took this sluice and kind of went wide open like this, that would have that same kind of effect, whereas it broadened out, just like we talked about within the desert, the material going out the back end would slow down. So it might go in at a pretty fair pace, like we've showed here, and the output might just be creeping along as it comes out. That would be great if I have an awful lot of silty kind of material. The problem with this kind of sluice is it would tend to clog up at the back end before I'm ready. And so, typically what people try to do is just run it straight down the sluice. The old timers had it kind of right in that respect. But it is possible, and it is also possible you could create a sluice that had moving doors to create this kind of environment. And that's just one more thing that you can think about. Now, with that said, there are other ways to create similar kinds of effects, and that is the geometry of the height and so forth. One of the other things is, and we've talked about this before, and that is, what do you put in the bottom? Do you have these kind of curly Q miracle matting kind of things, or magic mats, or whatever we have, hurricane matting? Or do we have lots of cross-hatched 3M, essentially miner's moss, the 3M vinyl matting that you can buy at the store for about $3.95, or you can pay $30 for it from a miner's supply. Just depends on where you want to go. And that's something to look for. So 3M outdoor, the whole idea came about from outdoor mattings that you see in these offices. If you can find an office that's actually kind of going out of business or something like that, they may have one of these in the front door when it rains or when it gets snowy and muddy. They put this stuff down for you to scrape your feet on. If you look closely, if you cut out the edges, it's miracle matting. Not miracle matting, it's miner's moss. But anyway, it works pretty well. Each of these has its own characteristic. Each of these will work to trap gold. The main thing I wanted to point out is that by having various types of them, you can trap different types of gold in the same flow. And that has the behavior like that opening wide or narrowing down without having the detrimental side effect that the flow gets clogged up in a particular stage. And also, you can, if you do them right, you can actually swap them around depending upon what you're doing. All of this is kind of different ways of playing with the sluice box flow patterns. And that's what I wanted to kind of talk about tonight is, when you're looking at a sluice box, don't think of it as, I'm doing this and I'm feeding it and I'm filling it. Think of it as each of these stages has a different why. It's there for a purpose. Each stage does a different kind of function, and each one will require you to understand how to feed it best, how to orient it best, how to play with it based on where you are, because it's going to vary not so much by the sluice box. And I see this happening a lot. I see guys arguing over what they're catching and stuff, and I'm going, the funny part is one's arguing about an area that's known for fine gold, and the other one's arguing about an area that's known for coarse gold, and they're arguing about how it captures the other thing. It's kind of irrelevant. The question is, how do you use your sluice box? Can you learn to use your sluice box like fishermen do? Excuse me. Like fishermen do or photographers do, can you use the tool you have before you in an efficient manner and be able to catch more gold? That's what it comes down to. Can you sit there and use that sluice box in a way, that sluice box there, in a way that captures more gold more effectively, and you're content with what you're getting with it? Remember, gold is where you find it. That means if you're really having a great time finding gold using the sluice the way you do, more power to you. If you aren't, then look into the whys. Try to understand why it's not working, what you could do to improve it. Does it mean a change in my matting? Does it mean I need to get a super sluice or a dredge or something like that? Or is there a law that's going to, there's just a bunch of things you got to think about. But I just thought I'd bring that up tonight in the context of back to the sluice box. It's something to think about in the context of all the stuff we've been talking about recently, which is kind of how do you get started finding gold fast, and where can you tune things to make it go and work better for you. Find more gold faster. How can we help you do that? That's what we're about here at Hunting for Gold. Let's see, what do we have for people's comments at this point? Joe Kerrigan, I saw a TV show. There was a vibrator table for use where there was no water. That's entirely possible because of the nature of gold. Now, one of the things you want to make sure of when you're using something like that is that the gold and everything is dried out completely. You typically do that in a dry washer, and one of the things that a dry washer can do also is induce a static charge into the gold, which will cause it to stick preferentially to the stuff that doesn't have any ability to hold a static charge. That'll drift on past while the gold kind of sticks and slows down, going down that vibrating plate. And that's that's a pretty common practice in today's dry washers, so you might want to look that up. Let's see. Charles says, good evening, Jess. Good sound, good picture. Great. Glad to hear it. And David Roy Phillips says hello from the Four Corners of New Mexico. Awesome. So we're having a great night. Vic Ta is here from Western Australia again. Good to see you. Good to hear from you. And we've got our show on the road. Let's call it a night for now. Kind of short one tonight, but I just wanted to touch on this back to the Sluice Box, and also to remind you to check out the GPC offer. Like I said, it goes vamoose tomorrow night, so check that one out. The gold DVD collection is still available, and it has a whole section on how to sluice and how to set up a sluice and all that kind of stuff, as well as panning and prospecting and mapping and getting started with all that stuff. So check it out on that link. You just go look at it and see if you like it. If you're interested, take me up on it. I'll catch you then. Have a good night. Good prospecting. Prospector Jess over and out. See you tomorrow night.